Here's where we left off. We've already learned that there are three parts for this biochemical pathway called cellular respiration. The first one is glycolysis, and it takes place just, somewhere inside of the cell, okay? Just somewhere in the cell, inside of the cytosol. And the other two steps, they take place inside of a mitochondria. No mitochondria, these things can't happen. The first step will make some ATP and a little bit of water, but no CO2. The CO2 gets made here at the citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle. And we learned that there were two steps that we needed to know for the Krebs cycle. Step one creates acetyl-CoA from the pyruvates that were made by glycolysis. And step two creates a lot of NADH and FADH that is going to power the electron transport chain. And we learned that the electron transport chain is where all the magic happens and lots of ATP gets made. Also lots of water gets made. It's at this step that oxygen gets used. No CO2 gets made. CO2 here, water and made, and oxygen gets used there. Now, we've been talking about aerobic cellular respiration, which is what happens when there's oxygen around. But the question is, what happens when oxygen is not around, right? Before I talk about that, though, let's just mention again that we're always talking about glucose, right? If you eat carbohydrates, even something like bread, you're thinking, oh, there's no sugar in bread. Even if there's no sugar in the bread that you eat, the starch that is found in bread is made out of sugars. And so ultimately, when it gets digested, we will process it as simple sugars like glucose. So this is the one we're always talking about. However, if you ate a complete protein diet, your body could still funnel those molecules into the glycolysis pathway. And if you're for some reason you're eating nothing but fats, that'd be a really weird diet. But if it was nothing but fat, yes, you can still put it into the glycolysis pathway. You can still use it. But what happens if oxygen is not available? And right here, I proudly say fermentation. Actually, I misspell fermentation. That's, oh dear. And besides, it's not even fermentation. Our molecular biologist has strongly encouraged us to not use the word fermentation to describe this, although you'll find it on probably some of the images from your textbooks. Technically, they would prefer that you use the expression anaerobic respiration. I will tell you honestly that in my quizzes, don't worry about whether it's fermentation or anaerobic respiration, but pay attention to your lab instructor. Anaerobic respiration. Pay attention to your lecture instructor if they want you to know both of those things. So when yeast need to make ATP, but there's no oxygen available, they will use a different pathway. They will start off here with glycolysis, la, 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 everything's usual, pyruvic acid, la, 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 everything's usual, but they will do a different step. And instead of making CO2 at the end, they will end up making ethyl alcohol. And that is why when yeast are given carbohydrates like what is it that beer gets made out of? Hops and barley or something. Anyway, when you give them that, but you take away their oxygen, they will make ethyl alcohol for you. Now, this is not a very efficient way to make ATP because only 2 ATP get made, but they'll use up a whole ton of the carbohydrate and keep themselves alive. Okay? Human muscles, when we are exercising, and we're exercising hard enough that not enough oxygen is getting to those muscles, we're still breathing, right? But not enough oxygen is getting to those muscles, then you'll feel your muscles start to burn, right? Because, ow. So how's that happening? Well, this is an example of anaerobic respiration in humans. We will take glucose, send it through glycolysis, make a little bit of ATP, make the pyruvic acids. And then when our pyruvic acids go through the rest of the pathway, and remember, we've got no oxygen around, we end up making lactic acid. Not as much fun at a party as ethanol is, but it is our way of very inefficiently using up glucose in the absence of oxygen to make enough ATP to keep our muscles going. So this is our version of anaerobic respiration. You should know in the absence of oxygen, the process is called anaerobic respiration, and it is very inefficient. It only makes the ATP that were made by the glycolysis step, and our waste product will be lactic acid. The accumulation of lactic acid in your acting muscles is what causes that burning sensation when you're at the gym. Okay? Let's do some questions that you might bump into. What is the main energy source for our cells? Go ahead and pause me. Give it some thought. What's our main energy source? That's right. It's ATP. ATP, the little rechargeable battery that has been charged. The dead rechargeable battery is ADP with the phosphate. In which stage of aerobic cellular respiration are most of the ATP molecules made? This isn't hard, right? It's all in that electron transport chain. Not all of them, but like there's only like 2 out of each of the other steps. It's like the rest of them electron transport. During cellular respiration, the energy in glucose, oh golly, what happens? All right, pause me, read it, give it some thought. Is transferred to starch? No, the glucose could have come from starch. Is used to manufacture glucose by exergonic reactions? Yeah, just because I use the fancy terms, don't let that persuade you. It gets released all at once? No. If you burn glucose, it just all gets released as once. But the energy in glucose gets carried by the electrons through the electron transport chain. And since it's carried stepwise, it is very efficiently used. So the right answer is it's carried in electrons. Where in the cell does glycolysis occur? Remember, that was the first step, and the first step happened outside the mitochondria. I could have said in the cytoplasm, right? Outside the mitochondria. Pyruvic acid must be converted into what before it can enter the citric acid cycle? Remember, the citric acid cycle's got 2 steps. The first step is taking pyruvic acid and turning it into acetyl-CoA, right? Those are examples of some questions, and I have not anything else to say. Do your SymBio activities and study well.